and welcome back to Dolli Crafter. First, I want to thank you so much for all the love, support, and understanding shown on this channel so far. It really makes me so happy that you're enjoying my videos because I'm having a lot of fun, especially reading your comments below. A lot of them are funny, but they're mostly just so beautiful, so thank you for taking the time. Okay, I'm getting a little emotional. Let's just go make this doll, okay? So, I've been obsessed with Rainbow High ever since they released. The first time I ever held one, I fell in love right away. But I've always wondered what one of these dolls would look like if they were just slightly larger. Now, MGA recently announced that they'd be releasing an Amaya doll that's 24 inches in length. But this isn't happening till October, and I don't have the patience, so I'm gonna make my own big Rainbow High doll using this doll. This is a Claudine doll from the Monster High range, and she's 17 inches in length. She's fully articulated and has a gorgeous complexion. The only thing is that her hands are in this fixed, sort of clawed-like position because she is a wolf doll, but I'll work this into my design. Now that we have the body picked out, it's time to figure out how the heck am I going to turn this into a Rainbow High doll. Back when I was throwing around ideas on how to make this doll work, I figured I could just put the Rainbow High head on the Monster High body, but when I placed them side by side, I realized the Rainbow High head is just too small for this body type. So I had to find a different option. And I found this. This is a Rainbow Surprise doll. These dolls released, I believe, in 2019 and came out right before Rainbow High. They don't have inset eyes, but they do share all of the same facial features. The complexion was actually a perfect match to the doll I'll be working on today. I was really excited about this, but her head was too big for her body, which means I'll have to shrink it. And I've never done that before. So before we go ruining a perfectly good doll, I figured I would test it on this Ever After High doll. I believe she's called a Maddie Hatter doll, but I'm not a fan of this face sculpt, no offense to Ever After High, so I thought she'd be perfect to practice on. But she won't go to waste. I actually have plans to make a sister doll, if all goes well, later on. Time to test this out. I start prepping her head for the head shrinking by doing all of the normal steps, including removing the hair, oiling her head, and then popping her head off. But instead of removing her face with acetone, I figured while the vinyl was still warm and malleable, I would try my best to cut out her eyes since I'll have to do this anyway. My plan was to use the factory paint as a guideline to help me in the cutting process. Again, I've never done this before, so I figured taking it slow and easy was key. But I failed on the first freaking try. Trying to shake it off, I figured I would just go as slow as possible and try my best. But at last, it kept happening over and over and over again. Knowing that this was a practice doll, I just kept going so I can get a feel for how the blade interacted with the vinyl. After completely cutting out the first eye, I flip it open and do some cleaning up. Not bad. I have to say for my first attempt, this really is not horrible. My second attempt, another story. It ended up way bigger than the first one, but again, she's a practice doll, so figured I'd just give her a third eye so I can get in some more practice cuts. By now, I'm kind of getting used to how the blade moves, even though I still have the occasional screw up. I clean it up. I also get used to cutting on an angle, which I believe is key for this. And there we go, a 3-headed practice doll. I actually don't mind how she came out, and I might use her in the future for another project. Now, as far as acetone, I was going to use the acetone I use for removing a face, but I decided to go to Home Depot and buy this quote-unquote industrial strength acetone. So the reason I went ahead and purchased this was because the plastic the head is made of is actually really thick. I didn't think that normal acetone, which you can actually touch, would be strong enough to penetrate that thick plastic. Now, I'm not a chemist and I have no idea what I'm doing, but after my experience, I do believe that this assumption was wrong. Taking the advice on the bottle, I headed outside into my alley, yes, I live in New York City, and plopped her inside of this crazy acetone. It seemed to be doing something. The hair started melting right away, but she wasn't fully submerged, so I went ahead and just added more and literally hoped for the best. I was a little nervous, not gonna lie. But for good reason! Look at her! Look at her! Oh, I've killed this doll, this poor doll. I know she was just a practice head, but she did not deserve to go out like this. Look at her face. Look at, oh man. Her head was jelly. How am I gonna fix this? I really want to fix this. Is it fixable? Because I'm so stubborn and I hate wasting materials, I'm gonna try my best to maybe line up these seams she now has on her face in hopes that it will, I don't know, go back to normal, maybe? Using paper towels, I'm gonna cradle her head so that maybe it becomes less damaged. But to be honest, this whole experience kind of got in my head, and instead of taking notes on what I did wrong, I kind of redid the same things over again. The head shrank, but you'll see what I'm saying in just a second. Ba-da-dum! History officially repeated. Though not as bad as the first time, I still had to build an apparatus made out of duct tape and cell phone cases to keep her head from further deforming. After sitting in this apparatus for about 3 days, the head did shrink somewhat back to normal. Minus a few bumps and bruises, of course. But despite her lumps and bumps, I'm very pleased with how she turned out in comparison to Maddie, our first victim. Now it's time for my favorite part. Just kidding. It's the eye cutting part. You know, the other part that I kind of suck at. See, now this time I actually tried to learn from my mistakes. One thing that helped was just going super slow, like maybe slower than necessary. And every time I felt like I didn't have good leverage on a cut, I would play musical chairs with the head until I did. Another thing that helped was to cut a smaller hole to begin with because it was easier to go back and refine the shape than to make a mistake, you know, and like slice her head open. Once I make my first cut, I start to look for areas of improvement. I even hold her up to a magnifying glass so that I can inspect the shapes to make sure that they're even. And here they are! Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful eyes. They're so even! Took forever, but here we are! Okay, next up. Moving right along. Now in preparation for both her inset eyes and for her reroot, we're going to be removing the back of her head. I make a line for reference so when I'm reattaching, things line up evenly. Once we remove all this crap, it's time to reattach or attach her head to her new body. This was a little difficult and I had to get in some weird angles, including this one. For some reason, the head was having a hard time fitting on the body, even though the head flopped around like a dead fish. Now, I think this could have been solved by maybe shrinking the head one more time, but I use hot glue instead. Now, I understand that this will limit her head mobility and the articulation in her neck, but I care way more about her head staying on her shoulders. Now that she's propped up on little dude, we can move on to yarn. I swear, yarn is my all-time favorite for doll hair. And this time, I even got yarn that had a wrapper. Just for you. I got this yarn because once you unravel it, you end up with all these different bundles of beautiful colors. Once I had all the yarn unraveled, it was really simple to choose the color. Now to prepare the yarn for the reroot, I just cut a bunch of the same length, the desired length, until the entire pile is gone. Once cut, I paint the scalp a complementary color to the yarn. I usually pick the darkest tone because it seems more natural. Once the paint dries, we're ready to reroot. Similar to Jules, I'm going to be rerooting her attached head and her head cap separately. Now her head is in a very fragile state because of the acetone, so I felt it necessary to go in at different angles and different speeds to make sure that I don't warp or dent her face. Now that we successfully have one in, it's time to repeat that process. See, this is why I love yarn for hair. Oh, speaking of yarn for hair, I wanted to make sure that I let you guys know a dread tutorial is in the works. I have a couple of projects that I had already planned plus one collab, but I promise, I heard you and I'm making it happen. Okay, anyway, back to this hair. Ooh, look how pretty. Look at the colors. Okay, next step, eyes. You'll have to bear with me because this doll has some big ol' eye holes. Yeah, so my eye moles were just too small and probably would have just fell out of her head. So I came to the conclusion that I'll have to make these myself. Using a piece of paper, I traced the shape of each eye and then began playing around with both iris and pupil sizes, which got pretty interesting at times. But once I had a general shape to work with, I whipped out my air dry clay and used this template that I've created as a guideline to start bulking out the eyes. Due to a dead camera battery, I had to film these clips from my phone, so I apologize. I'm basically showing you here that I pressed the clay inside of the eye mold to create these imprints. I then baked it, cut out the iris size, and filled in the void with epoxy sculpt. Once the epoxy is fully cured, I begin the painting process by painting both of the eye potatoes white. I'll be using acrylics in the colors magenta, blue, and yellow. I'm also going to add white to these colors so that I can develop the lightest shade of those colors as well. As for painting the actual eye, I wouldn't say I've developed a technique per se, but I definitely have a preference to work back and forth between lights and darks and add contrasting colors to bring out the details of the sculpt. Something that also helps with this is using a dry brushing technique. For these eyes, I use the dry brushing with white and light yellow. After the resin and adding the glitter, the eyes are done. As you know, I live in New York City and we recently got hit pretty hard by Hurricane Ida. Though the damage to my apartment was minimal compared to others, I suffered the most damage in the room I was using for my art room. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of my furniture, art supplies, and some electronics, including one of the SD cards I was using to film this project. Though I'm still sorting through the mess and rebuilding, I do apologize for the extreme jump in footage. The footage that was lost included me turning her into a demon to accommodate those clawed-like hands of hers. It also included the body blushing, adding pigment to her face, and this face up! Oh, I wanted to show you this so bad. But I'm not gonna cry about it anymore. I'm still very proud of how she turned out, and I can always show you the process on her sister. Now, I usually don't gravitate towards big eyelashes, but her eyes seem too big, so I added a layer of epoxy sculpt to kind of reduce the eye shape just a smidge. I think her eye looks better this way, to be honest. Once the epoxy was dry, I gave her some really cool eyeliner and then popped on her sick eyelashes. Ultimately, I think the lashes fit this doll since she is a demon, so it kind of gives her like a seductive, fierce sort of vibe. Oh no. If you know anything about me, it's that I don't sew. As you can tell by the stickers alone, sewing just causes me so much frustration. This machine hardly gets any use in my house. I often forget how to set it up, and once I get going, it's a long and stressful process for me. The pattern that I'm using today is one that I purchased off of Etsy. Because I did not create this pattern, I'm not going to spend too much time here because this is somebody else's material. But if you are interested in this garment after I'm done, hopefully, I'll include a link for these patterns below. The only things I can take credit for are painting the flames, the frustration I felt, and turning the dress pattern into a top. So instead of me filming how I managed to create a butt crack, I figured I'd just give you little snippets of the process. The overall vibe I was going for was like a mixture of like late 80s, early 90s, denim rocker, painted flames, that sort of thing. And now that it's done, I think I did a pretty okay job. Now for her undercut. When the head was separated, I'm guessing I cut it way too early while it was still drying from the acetone, and it ended up drying uneven. It left really large gaps that I couldn't fill with glue, so I used epoxy sculpt instead. Once the epoxy was fully cured, it seemed to have fixed the issue quite nicely. So I went ahead and patched up the base color in preparation for the flocking. Flocking, which by the way I made myself by cutting tiny pieces of yarn, and applying with Elmer's glue all. After laying down a thick base of Elmer's glue all, I start working in very small sections. Once the glue has completely dried, you can remove any excess that you have hovering over the top. If you have any bald patches or uneven areas, you can reapply and do this process over until you have a nice even surface. This doll took about 3 layers until everything seemed very even. I then added a thick layer of Elmer's glue all on the top and let her dry. Time for glossing! I love this part so much. It just brings so much life into the project, and it brings out colors so well. I really love glossing the lips, the nose, the waterline, and for this project I even went ahead and glossed her horns. Oh, and I can't forget, I also glossed her ears. The final step is to give her a mani-pedi and then let her dry. And once she's dry, oh my goodness, I love her so much. Despite all the obstacles that went into making this doll and the video, oh, she's perfect and I'm so excited! Oh, let's put her together. Everyone, meet Josie. Josie was a name chosen by my very good friend Courtney. This little demon was filled with learning experiences and challenges. Everything from head shrinking, to cutting vinyl, to sewing. But in the end, I'm so proud of myself and I love this doll so much. Thank you all for your patience and for watching Josie here become part of the Dolli family. We're so happy to have you. Aw, that's sweet. Whoa, was I just talking or what am I doing here exactly? I don't know. Guess I'll just go home then. All right, bye-bye.